Aloha and welcome to Phuket. In today's episode, we will be briefly looking at the range of impacts that are affecting Phuket's coastal ecosystems. Phuket is an island off the west coast of Thailand, situated in the Andaman Sea. As part of the Coral Triangle, Phuket has a diverse ecosystem including fringing reefs, mangroves, and a number of offshore islands. Unfortunately, the buildup of anthropogenic perturbations on the ecosystems following a couple of stochastic events has led to the degradation of the island's resources, which is a concern for the local community who are highly dependent on them. Firstly, let's look at the two natural impacts that really tested the resilience and resistance of these coastal ecosystems. In 1998, a mass bleaching event affected coral reefs across the tropics. However, Phuket's coast remained largely unaffected due to its high state of resistance. Unfortunately, in 2004, this region was devastated by a tsunami. Phuket was one of the hardest hit regions, along with Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and India, with 8,000 lives lost and 56% of coral reefs severely impacted in Thailand. The tsunami caused contamination of water and soil, with further damage from hazardous waste and debris. Marine habitats were severely damaged, reefs were uplifted, turned over, and inundated with sediment, and mangroves were completely flattened. The impacts from this event were extreme and long-lasting in terms of humanitarian, economic, and ecological effects. But 6 years later, another bleaching event left Phuket's reefs in an even worse state. The 2010 bleaching killed 90% of Phuket's remaining corals. What was once a resistant reef was left in a vulnerable state after the tsunami due to increased susceptibility to disease and corallivores and the lack of coral recruitment. Speaking with local dive guides in South Phuket, they explained how noticeable the difference in the reefs was after the bleaching, which affected their dive business. However, dive tourism in itself is also one of the anthropogenic impacts associated with development that is currently affecting Phuket. Divers and snorkelers cause damage to the reef through direct contact and removal of marine souvenirs, but also through increased demand for tours, which has led to additional anchor damage and mooring sites. As both scientists and tourists, we need to be aware that we may also be contributing to these impacts through our research activities, so we must ensure that our science-tourism does not become part of the problem. Human impacts are not just a modern phenomenon. Phuket has felt the pressures of development for centuries. Tin mining in the 1800s and rubber plantations in the early 1900s resulted in massive clearing of native forests as well as offshore dredging. More recently, land use changes continue, with further clearance for infrastructure development in response to population growth and also the rise of modern Phuket's most important industry, tourism. Tourism in Phuket brings in approximately 6 million visitors each year, which makes up 35.6% of the GDP. This rapid growth has significantly impacted the coastline. For example, Patong Beach in the 1970s was little more than a few bamboo huts selling fruits, but now it has become the most developed beach in the whole of Phuket. These changes to the coastal ecosystem have resulted in habitat loss, changes in sand and water dynamics, increased erosion, and so on. Port development has also increased following the tourism boom. It often requires the removal of coastal mangroves, which are vital to tropical ecosystems. Mangroves are nursery grounds for all kinds of marine species. They play an important role in carbon sequestration and nutrient cycling. And they also act as a physical barrier to lessen the impact of cyclones and storm surges. Port development also involves dredging of the ocean floor, which causes massive disturbance to the ecosystem as it removes benthic organisms as well as releasing sediment into the water column. Additionally, increased boat traffic has led to more light and noise disturbance, injury to marine wildlife from boat strike, and water contamination from antifoulants, oil spills, and sewage dumping. Pollution is one of the most visible impacts of an increased development in general. Plastics, glass bottles, discarded items, and trash of all kinds can be seen on the streets, in the parks, washed up on the beach, in the mangroves, and even in the ocean. This kind of pollution is not just an eyesore, it's a major hazard to wildlife and can affect water quality through chemical leaching.
So next time you're out and about, remember to take your rubbish with you.
The other industry that depends on and simultaneously impacts the reefs and coastline is Phuket's fisheries. These include commercial fisheries, artisanal or subsistence fisheries, and aquaculture. Impacts from commercial fisheries are the greatest due to the quantity of fish caught and the extent of fishing effort. The images you are seeing now are just one snapshot of the fishing catch at one market on one of the quietest days of the week, several hours after the market first opened. Imagine the extent of the fishing pressure around the entire coast of Phuket for 1 year. Based on our observations, at this fish market, there were approximately 470 crates of fish, which could lead to over 171,000 crates for the year. Catch here contained a lot of leather jackets, which is not traditionally a commercial fish species. Due to overfishing, species previously considered undesirable for consumption are now highly prevalent in fish markets.
Worryingly, there's also been an increase in the catch of juveniles, which does not bode well for the future of Phuket's fisheries.
As catch has declined, there has been a shift towards aquaculture, which since 2004 has accounted for around 18% of fish production. Aquaculture is not a panacea for the fishing crisis. It is another form of development that has led to mangrove clearance and changes in water quality, as well as being subject to outbreaks of disease within the stock. Speaking with some of the local restaurant owners in Nayang, they explained how all of their fish now comes from aquaculture, since capture fish are now smaller than they used to be. Also, they predominantly sell sea bass because grouper is too expensive as it is rarely caught. In terms of subsistence fisheries, although they are on a smaller scale than commercial, they are still of high sociocultural importance. This is just another added pressure to the fish stocks and the wider ecosystem. They are also largely unmanaged. It seems that dependence on these resources, either in terms of tourism and development or fisheries, has led to increased pressures and also impacts. Rather than having a sustainable approach, there seems to be more of an exploitative attitude toward resources here. We know that over-exploiting resources now will lead to complete depletion and therefore no economic stability for the future. But sustainability requires a strong management team to be effective, and that is something Phuket is currently lacking. Unfortunately, the delicate state of politics here at the moment means that there are several governance systems in place, but none seemingly have much authority or positive impact in terms of managing the coastal resources. This is most clearly seen in the lack of compliance to the fishing closures in the marine park, where, as you can see, there is much discarded fishing gear as well as a number of boats and people fishing right on the coast. Fishing closures would offer a little relief from the constant pressures felt by the coastal ecosystems. However, without any enforcement in place and with bribery and corruption in the policing system high, the fish stocks and reef ecosystems have little to no chance of recovery. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is also a major issue in Thailand, amounting to approximately 10 to 20 billion US dollars per year. The main problem is the additive effects of all of these impacts. The tsunami and bleaching events reduced the resistance of the reef ecosystems, so they were less able to cope with the anthropogenic pressures we have just discussed. This has resulted in low resilience and has now left these systems in a very vulnerable state, which unfortunately is why the state of Phuket's coastline is so depleted compared to what it once was.
So whether you're in a busy beach like Patong or a relatively quiet beach like Nayang, remember, there are many impacts to look out for. And of course, as always, be aware of your science tourism footprint. I'll see you guys next time in Bali.